Good afternoon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to moderate one more panel at FEBRABAN Tech 2025, and we'll now have a talk on governance as a vector for innovation, sustainability,
Hoje a
and
gente vive num
performance.
mundo
Today we live in a world that is under transformation at exponential speed, and the companies face a lot of pressure on innovation and to show performance goals for the ESG. But sustainability and innovation need to be in line with the corporate strategy, which goes much beyond complying with reaching the goals. That's why corporate governance is on the core. It's the guidance of everything, and where we can see coherence between strategy and the way information is launched and the decisions and the decision process. For this panel, we'll discuss how to live formality and make culture and the decision process.
Quais os desafios que a liderança executiva?
So what are the challenges for the executive leaders, and what are the necessary instruments and the tips for that? For this discussion, I invite only women to be the panelists of this stage, because we won't talk about female leadership only. No, the female leadership is just a small point of this discussion. So I invite Kelly Fiel, Superintendent of Institutional Relations of Itaú Unibanco.
Valéria
Café, General Manager of IBGC.
Vanessa Brenenck, que é
advocacia, a lawyer at Brenenck Lawyer's Office.
E Regina Magalhães,
Attorney's Office, and Regina Magalhães, expert in innovation and sustainability.
Bom, antes de tudo, eu gostaria de agradecer a FEBRABAN.
First, I'd like to thank FEBRABAN for the opportunity to moderate this panel. It's a pleasure, and I would like to thank for the panelists to their time, because it's quite a complicated agenda with a lot of competition. And thank you also for the ideas you share and your experiences. And I'll start the debate with a question that is important to the organizations, because corporations are facing the pressure of the financial markets and from regulators of society as a whole to innovate, to report, and improve the quality of the ESG practices. And all that demands a long-term view. Not having good practices nor good corporate strategies are a risk to the long-term existence of the companies. But the company are also demanded on the short-term results. They need to have quarter goals reached, and many sustainability and innovation projects
exigem investimentos substanciais e também de longo prazo.
Substantial investments also on the long run and with a lot of uncertainties. So how can the governance structures evolve to deal with this new situation, justifying decisions to privilege the long term, but also dealing with the short term and the budget of the company? So Valéria, I'll start with you. IBGC has an important role in promoting the ESG agenda in the board of the administration of the Brazilian companies. So, well, thank you very much, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I think it's important to bring some points here. Well, first of all, this morning I heard someone from a board of directors saying that, well, I was a consultant, because we have a lot of board members that are also consultant. So he was one, and he was saying, well, I understood marketing separated from ESG, from strategy, and then I understood that most of the companies make mistakes, and when they make mistakes or when they die, it is because they have no governance. And I could only understand that when I went to IBGC, and I could understand that every decision is interlinked. Everything is interlinked. So if you have no process, structure, system, organization, or processes, codes, and so on, then you don't have a single way of working. So it's worth considering that governance is made of principles, values. So when you have principles, values, ethics, and you have everything structured in processes, no matter if people say that it's expensive, because it's not, because it's even more expensive not having structure, nor having that structured, organized, because in fact this is how you die, because you need organization and all that. So when we are talking about ESG, people don't understand what ESG is. So when we talk about ESG, we talk about indicators. How you create environmental and social indicators to bring to the company, to the strategy of the company. So that's it. It's a strategy, it's a governance, how to eliminate or reduce negative impacts and increase the positive impacts to the whole ecosystem of the organization. And it has to be related to metrics and measures that are quite well structured and organized. So in fact, when we have all that, for example, organized in an organization, that is what we say in the code, because we have the code of governance and best practices, and this code brings exactly that. I mean, everything has to be structured in goals and metrics so that you have less risk and more results. So these are the points that are very important, and I think it's worth mentioning 3 economic data to emphasize the importance of ESG agenda to the companies. 1, despite the regulation impacting the short-term profitability, on the medium and long run, regulation will reduce the capital cost and attract investments and increases the value on the market, and all that makes governance. Wonderful. And now you mentioned the IBGC code. So IBGC has a lot of interesting material, and it's all for free, right? Yes, it's all for free in the portal of knowledge of IBGC. You can download all information and everything so that your organization can develop this governance journey. I hear a lot of people saying that governance, well, it's not for my company. Maybe not everything is to your company, but governance or showing results is governance, and having the risk matrix is governance, and analyzing your company and understanding how to impact your employees or how to impact your ecosystem and how you treat your suppliers, what is the strategy of organization, all that is governance. Yeah, that's right. Now, Kelly, if you can talk a little bit about how it works in Itaú, how you deal with this long-term and short-term dilemma. Well, good afternoon, Andrea. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I'd say that Valeria mentioned the current context. We are living in a more complex business environment. Companies need to face many risks. Risks like regulatory and climate risks, until reputation risks and technology risks. So we need to be always prepared to face all these situations. And talking about Itaú, Itaú is a centennial company. So we face it a lot during our times, like changes in different economic cycles, changes in societies, technological changes, and we could survive and overcome all that. A lot due to our ability to adapt. So that, well, in fact, to live 100 years, you need to adapt to many different moments. And we brought all that as the history basis and the origin of the structure that we have today. So today, we have quite a solid governance basis that we translate into modern practices. Like, for example, we have our ethics integrity program. We have a culture based on the continuous development and diversity. And we have ESG on the core of our strategy. So during our conversation, I'll bring some examples to you.
So it's this ESG is not seen by many people as being a risk. So this ESG has an impact on credit risk, on capital risk, and the need to raise money. Yes, you have to make it. Okay, this ESG is no longer a differential. It's something that is mandatory. And now, Vanessa, I would like to hear from you, as you are a regulatory authority. There are also various novelties in terms of innovation. Innovations always comes ahead of the regulatory authority, right? So there are risks entailed in this whole scenario. And could you comment on how this process rolls out? I would like to thank all of you who are listening to us. I'm very happy to be here in this event talking about governance, which is a topic that's so dear to me. I would like to, when you talk about regulatory authorities, you were here yesterday, right? Galípolo, the president of the central bank, mentioned the collaboration of the market, and to collaborate with someone, you need to have a good relationship with that person. And the basis of this relationship has to be trust, which is a technical trust. That's how I call it. Everybody at this event talks about data foundation. You have to have your data has to be trustworthy, but you have to trust people, and this technical trust is the base for you to have long-term relationships. And by having long-term relationships, you are able to create the team and the banks. This is a cooperative creation. You can create regulatory standards. The regulatory authority first has to become familiar with innovation, has to understand what's happening, to then establish regulations. Now, people who innovate know what is the content of the innovation right at the start. And when you know the content of the innovation right at the start, you know what the risk is and how to manage the risk. And therefore, this is the best environment. You create the standards, you create the mechanisms for supervision, for monitoring, and for penalties if such is the case. And as a result, you have a risk management choice. And it's not the Congress that's going to tell you what you should do. In fact, you tell yourself what you need to do. So you guide the regulatory authority, because the regulatory authority is willing to establish regulations as a collaborative effort. So you saw this with a good example of this is DREX, is the work being done with DREX.
Aliás, baixem o material
download the material of the IBGC. There's a lot of good stuff, and there are guidelines on AI for board members. There's a code for best practices, so this material that I'm talking about, there's a lot of good stuff, and it's free of charge. So my call to action is to let you know that there's a possibility that you and I to work together under the infrastructure of the state and to work on innovation in terms of regulatory aspects through establishing trust and by working together with the maker agents. You raised an issue that is very important. We cannot be passive. We have to be proactive, exactly, to guide and build regulations together. Regina, and now you have a wealth of experience. Until a few months ago, you were business director of Microsoft, and prior to that, you were director of sustainable infrastructure for Johnson's Control and director of the automotive center at Schneider Electric. And your purpose at the time was to increase the value of the business. What can you tell us about long term and the short term, and how important is all of that for organizations? The first point, normally we talk about dilemmas when we think of the long term, and I don't see any dilemma whatsoever. Any company to maintain its quarter results in a consistent form, it has to comply with deadlines. Otherwise, things are not going to work out. You know, people have difficulty in terms of planning, but companies that are able to look at their relationships and deal with long-term plans, these companies are able to generate short-term results in a more consistent manner. Another important point is what we consider short and long-term. This is changing. Until some time ago, we would say that sustainability was a long-term issue, but now we talk about climate changes. Years ago, climate changes would be a problem that would have to be faced by our children or grandchildren. And now last year we saw the devastating floods in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, forest fires, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next quarter. So this now is a short-term issue that can affect the results, the business results in the short term. A bank can be highly affected by a major environmental disaster, or by a major social change, or by a major political change, which is what we are facing now on an international level. The same holds true when we think of innovation. Innovation is to be considered as a long-term strategy. Of course, that for some products, the cycles of technological development are longer, but more and more we are beginning to see a shortening of this period. And so there are examples that attest to this. So a great disruptive change in the market can happen in the next quarter. And so what is the role of the member of the board or of a board? The reality today, as most companies, is the fact that areas are rather segmented. People focus strongly on results and not on strategies, but the board is the right place to act as the center of strategic intelligence. The board is the space that can keep track of what is happening outside of the company, identifying trends and identifying changes that can put at risk the business of the company and can also generate opportunities for these companies. So this ability to keep track of what's happening in the company and what's happening out of the company, this ability to connect the short term and the long term is fundamental for any company to be successful.
Palavra que depois eu vou puxar da Kelly, inverter só pouquinho. A gente tinha comentado.
We had said a few words about the role of the shareholder. The shareholder also has to have an active role.
Palavra em inglês que a gente usa, né, o stewardship.
We refer to it as stewardship. Could you say a few words about this?
Stewardship
is the governance of the investor. Every company, you as an entrepreneur, you must have investors backing you. But if the investor only asks you about the short term, it will be difficult to innovate because there will be no space for innovation. So the idea is that investors be trained and that they engage themselves, that they keep this continuous updating for the short, medium, and long term, considering there's no dilemma. The truth is that there's continuity, and this relates to sustainability, and this is relevant because one of the governance principles is accountability, and therefore who do you account to? If you think of the short term, the rendering of accounts has this short-term bias. So the stewardship is related to accountability, and therefore rendering of accounts and stewardship are balanced. The other person who you have to render accounts to is regulatory authority. If this regulatory authority has no rules, then you don't have a frame to render accounts. And if you do this with self-regulation, then you actually have a way which does not entail political risk, which have the way for your business to grow and be structured strongly. Kelly, now I would like you to comment on the goals related to innovation, sustainability, diversity, and how are these goals connected to the strategy of the bank? And what are the indicators that attest to this evolution? Well, before talking about the goals, I would like to say what our ESG strategy looks like. We have a very solid governance base, and this is based on 3 pillars: sustainable finances, climate transition, and diversity and development. And talking about the objectives under each of these segments, when we look at sustainable finances, our objective in this respect is to mobilize 1 trillion Brazilian reais for sustainable finances until 2030. That's the deadline. And when we talk about climate transition, our objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reaching net zero emissions until 2050. And I'm talking about our portfolio, and talking about the development pillar. Until the end of this year, our objective is to make sure that 35 to 40% of the leaders of the company are women, and we want 27 to 30% of the employees in our company are black. So let's talk about entrepreneurship. The objective of our entrepreneurship is to direct 34.7 billion to the portfolio of companies whose leaders are women. And so, and as a last example, the vendors and suppliers. The objective in this respect is to engage 100% of our active suppliers and make sure that they embrace the ESG agenda. So when we look at the structure and we reflect on numerical objectives, they're objectives that can be controlled, can be measured, and that can be on which you can render accounts. You realize that we have a very robust and solid governance structure, and at the end of the day, you're able to keep track of this structure, and you can direct the flow. And so we don't know what the future, how long it will take for the future to knock at our doors. So we have we have objectives with defined deadlines, and in the course of time, we're able to organize and work around this and align whatever is necessary. This is a fundamental process, and flexibility is a must because everything changes so quickly. You talked about diversity. Many people think that this is just mandatory to have 30% of the employee headcount as women or whatever. But many people do not see something fundamental when we hear that a bank is going to allocate 1 billion reais for sustainable companies. This is a strategic plan that is part of the business. And diversity is the same. Diversity is a strategic factor. It's not an HR issue, it's a business strategy issue. Banks in Brazil in the last few years moved forward tremendously in terms of incorporating in the bank system a good part of the population that had been previously excluded. A few years ago, 40% of the population would not even walk through the doors of a bank branch. Nowadays, thanks to simplified accounts, microcredit, and PIX instant payment system, you're able to incorporate a large part of this underserved population. So, of course, it's all about social inclusion, which is a very important piece of this whole discourse. And diversity is a good part of this. There were important steps moving forward were taken, but more steps have to be taken. So, a good part of the population is bankerized, but banks can also to offer services and financial products that are more appropriate for a good part of the population. So there's no way that you can offer a new product to the client if you do not know the client very well. So if you think of the black population at all levels, from the bank branch until the board, without considering this population when you're making a decision, you have to remember to include this segment of the population. And the same holds for women, for LGBTQ people, and for all other social groups that the bank wants to reach out to and offer its services. This will only be accomplished if there are people that work in the bank that understand the reality of these different segments of the population. So any company has two reasons to incorporate diversity consistently and strongly. First of all, to ensure social justice. We have to have social justice and the possibilities of offering social inclusion for all social groups. But the reason is a strategic reason for the company, which is the ability of this company to know the reality of these different segments of the population. As a result, the company will become more profitable, will be able to offer whatever these population needs. Yes, exactly. Society has lots of diversity, and what we do has to be a reflection of this diversity. Otherwise, the company will never be able to deliver what it does best to all segments of the population.
E agora, Vanessa, volto com você.
And now I'm back to you.
Voltamos no ponto que você atua com governança, com mercado de capitais e resolução de disputa.
What about dispute resolution, the capital market? Could you talk about the legal aspects that reinforce this mission of social responsibility, and what kind of attrition still blocks the adoption of environmental, social, and governance practices at organizations?
Well, first, as you can imagine, it's not as simple to answer. But if I offer you quite a technical or legal or a skeptical answer, most likely at this time in the afternoon you will fall asleep. But if I say that there are fiduciary duties that, if not complied, affect your security number, then we'll have a problem, and then you will be thrilled on the topic discussion. So that's why the due diligence and the loyalty duty and secrecy and supervision and compliance duties are set forth in the law. They don't need to change. They are the anchor and the structure of everything. But this Congress is showing what innovation means. That is what we don't know. So when we don't know, we have only one certainty. We'll keep learning. We'll then have our students' mindset or the lifelong learning. But as I prefer my colleagues from Minas, they say that we'll have this students' heart just like the Brazilian song. So this is what will create innovation.
Ela existe.
Whenever it is there, it exists. So we were talking about governance, and innovation is the same. It is happening, and you are creating a standard based on what is the structure, what is already there. But what is already there is an infrastructure that has gaps. And these gaps will and shall be taken by me and you, so that altogether we create the standards of behavior so that the market can go on. So this is sustainability, otherwise we'll kill innovation. That is our main point. So we have the duties, but the regulator, and Galípolo mentioned that he wants to work in collaboration, but anyway, it's not a person. The central bank, you all know that they worked for PIX and Open Finance. And why did they work? Well, because everyone cooperated for that. And Drex is the same. It's an infrastructure that is happening with a governance that is being created now. All of us are the generation to make history and to make this governance happen in such a way that there is space according to what is there to innovate in the duties. And how will that happen? It will be with indication, and we'll do that. We'll indicate what is necessary to manage. What is the risk management we need to have? What is the level of innovation, and how we'll deal with this innovation strategy? And only based on that we'll have the existing duties, fiduciary duties, to be detailed. And this detailing will save the personal patrimony of many people, but it will depend on each one of you, led by associations and regulators in collaboration with the state regulator. So we also have something important here, that is the point of us living with the lack of focus, and it produces fights. So first of all, we need to have those conduct standards dealing with solving problems. When you know what to do, you have no fight. And if you have an investor that works not only in the short term, but is engaged and with a continuous follow-up, you deal with investors' problems. If you have a regulator with a regulatory sandbox and willing to have a smart inspection in an innovation process like the crowdfunding platforms or like B4, that is an infrastructure for the access market with companies of up to 300 billions using the tokenization of actions and blockchain for that. So you see, regulatory innovation, promoting innovation in entrepreneurship, bringing more innovation and a virtuous cycle that is established. Just to complement what you are saying, I would say that when we talk about the risks and innovation, it is worth mentioning that it all happens when we have 5 principles working. So it doesn't matter having governance in theory if in practice it's not there with ethics, first of all, because you need to know that, well, we do that this or that way. No, it won't work. And secondly, you need to have a goal. That organization only works if they deliver values and results to society. Otherwise, it won't work. And then you start talking about integrity, transparency, because we need to be transparent in processes. When we talk about CPF, that is the individual number, it is responsibility, accountability. If the individual is making a decision, whether being an investor, board member, director, manager, analyst, they are responsible for the decisions they are making. And equity. Everyone needs at least the same information and be treated in different ways, because there is nothing more unequal than treating everyone the same. So equity is important, especially when we are talking about different kinds of shareholders. And sustainability. When we are talking about sustainability, we are talking about the impact the organization is having in society. And here it's worth mentioning Itaú, who says will invest 1 trillion in climate. And why investing on climate and sustainability? First of all, because there is a regulation to be followed. That is to look at sustainability with the understanding of risk, the risk of sustainability and the risk of climate changes that are happening here now in the short term. And I think it's also worth mentioning that there is a climate governance that needs to be respected. And this climate governance is in the boards of administration and them understanding what climate is, because it's quite complex, and understanding they need to work and being individually accountable for that. Someone in the board needs to understand this term quite well. They need a supporting committee to support them on that. They need a risk and opportunity analysis, because whenever we see risks, we also need to see opportunities, because where there is risk, there is opportunity. And also the material issues, and we need to integrate strategy. And everything that is climate needs the strategy look, and it needs to be also part of the pockets of all organization leaders. That is, they need to match the metrics and the goals of the benefits and incentives of the employees. That is, their payment. And why not the investor, the board members? This is important. And reports must be made, and they need to be transparent so that everyone sees and understands them. And best practices must be exchanged, mainly when you are talking about climate. I'll get a link on that to ask how it is, because as the companies have their accountability and they need to be more prepared and stronger, these are the big companies. What about the family companies? So how IBGC sees that, they are looking at the family companies and the consultative boards, because this is what we're talking about, responsibilities, accountabilities, but we also have scope 3. I mean, it doesn't matter being sustainable in operations if my chain is not. Well, first of all, everything starts on the big companies, but the small companies somehow are traced by the organization, the big company. The big company will have a moment where they will impact the small one, whether because they are suppliers or work somehow and are part of the system. So when you have a regulation like this IRFSC, all the organizations related to the big companies will be in the traceability process. So there is no other way if everyone works properly. And what is nice today is that innovation is directly related to that, because you have very practical ways today with innovation to ensure that traceability is working. So when you talk specifically about the business, the small business, and it's not small business, because by the way, currently 40% of the companies listed are family businesses. Even Itaú comes from 3 family companies. So when we are talking about governance, we are talking about 3 kinds of governance. We are talking about the governance of the company, the governance of the family, and the governance of the patrimony. And they are interlinked. So how can you ensure that the 3 organizations in the family work that in a structured way? Well, it's a long journey. And it's only by doing that you know what to do. Companies, in fact, need to say, well, I'll face this process of change. And that's why I always say they start with 5 principles. And it was very nice when you brought here, Vanessa, this point of starting small, but with the basis and thinking about what you are doing, innovation, and if it is proper or transparent, or if I'll be responsible for the consequences of my decisions. Is it sustainable in my ecosystem? Am I treating everyone with equity? So if you answer all these questions, it's halfway through governance. Yeah, because innovation will always have human supervision. So if we human beings are not incorporated and we don't have all these principles in our souls, then innovation will start biased.
Pegando o ponto, já que a gente falou bastante.
Now, as we talk a lot about innovation, how is this point of integration? I mean, innovation with governance and this competence and sustainability, and the competence of the board members needing now, and also the high management to deal with that. This is an innovation that is growing exponentially, right? So something I know today, tomorrow I don't know anymore, because everything has changed. So we need to be flexible to learn constantly. So I'd like to start with you, Regina, because this is your area. Yeah, and I'd like to start by inviting you to know an important innovation that we had at FEBRABAN called the Green Taxonomy. In a very simplified way, is that FEBRABAN, supported by Getúlio Vargas Foundation, dealt with all the economic activities in Brazil, classifying them in green and non-green, the ones that contribute positively or negatively to the environment. So FEBRABAN applied the methodology to the list of banks, and they concluded that the financial system in Brazil today has 20% of all the finances for green economy. It seems positive, but it's far from ideal. We would like it to be much more, even though FEBRABAN made this analysis for the last 12 years, so from 2012 to 2024. And in the last 12 years, we had 25% growth, and these are the years we saw climate changes becoming more and more urgent, and this growth of 15 to 20% only, it's quite a shame. So we still have a lot to improve so that we can, in fact, have the financial system contributing effectively for the development of the green economy in Brazil. And how to do that? This is the most important point. It is doing that in such a way that it is a win-win to banks, companies, and society. That is, we need to understand that sustainability cannot be, first of all, philanthropy. It's not social investment. Secondly, it's not only risk. It has to be business opportunity as well. Investing in sustainability, whether a small, a big company, or a bank, it has to be profitable as well. Besides having a social impact and environmental impact in a positive way. We have huge opportunities today, mainly with the new technologies, because AI today, that we saw the MIT director showing how many technology changes are contributing to sustainability, like the green iron and green fuels and so on. So we have a lot of opportunities to change businesses. And a lot of opportunities in Brazil, especially of having greater energy efficiency in the use of water or the use of materials and having better productivity, because Brazil needs to progress on that. And it also contributes to the low gain of natural resources. But it cannot be only that. We have the paradox of efficiency. I mean, reducing consumption and improving the total consumption. So we need also to invest in changing the businesses. We need to change the business models. And the banks, well, banks have a huge power of influencing the direction of economy in their investment decisions, especially if you are not dealing with the risks, but with the view of opportunity, the long-term view, you can direct investments to segments with a higher potential of transformation. And with innovation and AI and with all the other technologies that are coming all together in a joint way, what we need, in fact, is to invest in innovation processes that are transformational and that we develop new business models so that we have, in fact, in many sectors of the Brazilian economy, a production activity that is sustainable and profitable. So it goes back to my first answer. The government needs to be a center of strategic decisions for that. Government will guide management and point the way where the management goes for the strategic investments. And lastly, there is an important point. We are here on a technology event. And it's quite interesting because years ago, we wouldn't talk about ESG in technology events. And now we are getting closer to that, but we are still distant in this sense. We need a big cultural change in the company so that, in fact, technology professionals incorporate it in their lives, this idea of ESG and sustainability. As I generally talk to the sustainability professionals that are still resistant to work with technology, that we need to make good use of this opportunity of using technology in favor of a transformation in the business and economy in Brazil. Regina, I'll get a link from your words and mention what Itaú is doing, because last year we had a journey at the bank that was quite good, strong, and robust in terms of training. And it was not guided to workers, analysts, no, it was in the high management, and we started top-down, because we need to engage everyone. The ESG agenda can only happen with everyone at the same page. Talents have to be measured, everyone has to buy these ideas. So we had a big round of trainings with many of them for the high leadership, and also trainings for the leaders in technology. We had trainings on Gen AI and people management in the more technical areas have certain difficulties in managing people. And we also have Cubo, that is one of the biggest hubs of technology in Latin America. And within Cubo, we created the ESG Cubo, that is the engagement of this agenda. And just to finish, in the beginning of the month, we launched the Institute of Science and Technology of Itaú, aiming at connecting the universities and the productive market and the innovation ecosystem. And all that is to show that everyone is involved, since training the higher leadership until the view of the bank on technology and the importance we have in the association of Cubo ESG with technology in this ESG agenda.
Cubo is fantastic. Now, talking about an issue that Regina raised, the role of the bank to influence companies because of credit lines and so on. Would you tell us something about this when I mentioned the 3 pillars that are part of our strategy? This includes as well, how do we reach zero net carbon emissions? We have to decarbonize the portfolios of our clients as well. This is part of our strategy when we direct resources to sustainability or to climate changes. We also have, this has to reflect on our entire chain when I talk about our suppliers and vendors, because our idea is to engage them in ESG agenda as well. So I'm influencing this chain as well. Nobody can stay out of this movement. If as a supplier who does not comply with human rights practices, then we terminate the contract with this kind of supplier. So our idea is to influence the entire chain from end to end. I would like to say a few words about artificial intelligence.
As empresas implementando inteligência artificial sem olhar para a estratégia.
But I have to look at the strategy of AI. And in this respect, there are a few steps that have to be taken for this implementation. Regina, when I was at Microsoft, Regina participated in this process together with us. And BGC, Microsoft, and Accenture, we published a text called AI and Corporate Governance. And in this publication, we addressed some important issues. It's always good to mention these issues to conceptualize everything. So first of all, when an organization is going to deploy AI, you have to define what is expected of AI. And someone said something to me, you have to be careful because today there are many companies that will deploy AI and they will come across a very high cost and will not realize why it's spending so much money. So first of all, you have to define what to expect from AI, where and how it will be deployed. What are the risks and opportunities? How will AI transform the work environment and the culture of the organization? Because this organization will change. The new entrants into the labor market will have serious problems in the near future. And how to prepare the teams, the suppliers, the clients for this change. So this entails continuous education effort, training efforts, and based on all this, you have to define what your appetite for investments in AI is. All this has to be very clear. Another point that has to be addressed by the board of directors: data security used in AI, privacy of the information used by AI. Yes, AI makes mistakes. Perhaps in the future they might not make mistakes. but they're far from not committing any mistakes. So AI has to be monitored very closely. The multimodal models have to be thoroughly understood, how they relate to each other, how you deal with these multimodal AI models, and then ethics. Ethics and responsibility is a key issue in terms of treatment and use of data. This is the most important aspect. And now, Vanessa, I would like you to give your final comments. People talk a lot about the board of director as the structuring party of governance. Alexandre Silva taught me one day in looking at the board of directors as a driver, as a chauffeur. You know, the driver looks on the rear view mirror to see what is behind him. But, you know, you have to stop strategically to check what is going on at this specific moment. What are the innovation structures that are in place at a specific moment? You turn on your headlights to deal with the short term. The stronger headlights, you have to think of the medium term. The only point is that our generation, is living in a map that changes all the time, and we're looking at a 3D map. In other words, we have to look the entire time. We have to look at the map all the time, and this is why pay attention. Keep your hands on the steering wheel, because we know what lack of attention will cause when you're traveling at a high speed. You're going to run off the road. And worse than that, the highway will also change all the time. You know, this is not what we had in our minds before. Well, our time is running out. The one last issue that I would like to address on greenwashing. Greenwashing is a buzzword, but last week I was at an event where it was said that when we go to the supermarket, 80% or 85% of the brands are still greenwashing. They're eco-friendly, they call themselves eco-friendly, but have zero carbon, but there's no way, there's no site that you can access. So could you comment on this? It's more than a risk to the reputation. It's an operational risk. So could you, I can start.
Não, vamos lá. O greenwashing é assim.
Greenwashing is cosmetic governance. That's how we refer to it, because at the end of the day, there's a lack of connection between what is being said, what is being said and what is being practiced. So it's just cosmetics. And governance has to be a governance that transforms. It has to make changes. It has to be inserted in the organization on all fronts. Otherwise, it will not work out. Then, when you talk about the board of directors, that's where everything starts. When I look at the bank, we have a couple of committees that include the higher level governance, that make the decisions on the strategic objectives, but also have the thermometer. What has to be complied with, what has to be followed. So we have our Social, Environmental, and Climate Committee, which is comprised of members of our board of directors, and these are not the bank employees, and that's where all the objectives are defined to strengthen our practices of ESG. And we also have our higher committee of ESG, comprised of members of our executive committee, and it is presided by the CEO of the bank. In this case, we have to comply with the strategic objectives in ESG that were agreed upon. So everything is linked We have the board of directors, the executive committee, and we're also able to link to all of this objectives, variable remuneration for the executives and collaborators. Very quickly, we're leaving in the era of post-truth. Everything is true and everything is a lie. So as consumers, we have to be very careful, which is to understand, and when we talk about AI, all these lies come up in our ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever tool you're working with, and how can we as individuals start to understand everything and try to figure out, is this really true or is this fake? So this is a lesson learned that we have to continue engaging all the time. Just because I got information does not necessarily make me believe in it. And as an organization, I have to go back to the principles. If I don't want to comply with the principles, well, then I won't do it. So there's this risk to the reputation. But the risk is one of the biggest risks, is the era of post-truth that we are facing. And this only tends to get worse with this enormous volume of information out there. I'd just like to add on, I agree to what you said, Valerie and Kelly, but recently two international organizations evaluated the climate change objectives of the biggest companies in Brazil, and they showed that these goals are not consistent. So there are organizations out there, they're highly qualified to evaluate whether companies are telling the truth or not, or if the goals that these companies established are consistent and are being achieved. So I would like to highlight that the board of directors is responsible for this. The board of directors is responsible for checking whether the executives are actually working towards achieving the established goals. But a report such as one I just mentioned can damage the reputation, but it also will have an impact on the access to capital that any given company might have, access to international markets, and this will have a huge impact on any company's business. So the board of directors has a leading role in making sure that there's no greenwashing going on in any given company. And also greenwashing, there's some words in English that people use, but for me greenwashing is the same as lying. That's it. Greenwashing is lying, and lies do not survive. Lies tumble down, especially when we have so many eyes looking at everything and so many possibilities of checking and monitoring what is being said. And so what I imagine is governance, a real governance.
Uma governança real.
I imagine real governance is, if into everything that was said here, is, if I can summarize, I would say one word: coherence. We have to be coherent, but we have to have this ethical coherence.
Eu estou vendo que vocês estão muito atentos.
I can see that you're paying a lot of attention, and we're very excited about this. But and today our time has run out. Is that we walk the talk, exactly. So thank you so much for devoting your time. Thank you to the audience for your participation, and a round of applause for this panel.